I think building a new space in our portion of the county is the right move from the library district standpoint. And it's gonna pay dividends for families, whether they live in Sterling Ranch, Solstice, Roxborough, Louviers, or in, you know, a less defined, more rural area of the northwest part of the county. So thank you. I hope to see you guys at the groundbreaking whenever that takes place this summer. I know I'll be there, and I hope that there are other residents from across Northwest Douglas County who choose to join as well, to celebrate hopefully a great new step for the library district.
Thank you. Next is Rashawn Ben Mosh. Forgive me if I mispronounced your name.
Moshe.
Again, I'm sorry.
I use my Hebrew name. I come as a Jewish American. I live in Arapahoe County. And I come regarding this book, which I ask you to remove from your library. I wouldn't have spoken up if I hadn't seen this bumper sticker this week. I don't know if you could read it, but it says, Israel and Israeli apartheid. To me, that's a major threat. My father was in the Battle of the Bulge. He passed away. My adopted father was a Holocaust survivor. His parents, his father served in the German army in World War I. He and his family was slaughtered in World War II. I feel this is happening here, and this book is used to indoctrinate young children to hate Jews and Zionists. I believe you, the board of directors, have the power to do something with that and go beyond the rules and policies when something is very important. And this, to me, is a life or death situation. I ask you to go above the law and do what is right.
Thank you, sir. That's all the people that signed up to address the board. Is there anyone else that would like to say something to the board of trustees? Okay, we'll end public comment and on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda, which allows us to approve more than one item with a single vote. This month it includes the minutes from last month as well as a budgeted capital expenditure for building envelope maintenance. Do I have a motion to pass the consent agenda?
So moved.
A second.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is a presentation on our investment. You want to introduce?
So today we have Chris Blacker joining us from Chandler Asset Management. And if you'll recall, he gives quarterly updates on our portfolio with Chandler. So he's here to just go over the last few months.
Okay. Chris?
Thank you. All right, so, as you know, I work for Chandler Asset Management. We're going to go through a presentation here to update you on two things. Serving your library investments and then sort of your core portfolio. I don't know if this, there we go. But before we do that, I wanted just to give you some, gosh, my time's
Time's up. Darn, Chris.
That's a good presentation. So I'm going to give you context for the investment environment by talking about what's going on in the U.S. economy. There's a lot going on, but I thought it would just give you a quick update. So the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the U.S., has a dual mandate to keep unemployment low and to keep inflation at a target level of 2%. So on those two fronts, the labor market, this is a chart showing the graph of jobs added in the U.S. Without, even if you couldn't read this graph, you can see that the numbers are getting lower. The pace of job growth in the U.S. is a very slow pace right now. We're not in a recession. The unemployment still does remain low, but the amount of jobs being added is fairly low, and that is a concern to the Federal Reserve Board, which I'll talk about more in a minute. On the inflation front, the big curveball we're dealing with right now, as you're probably aware, is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the effect on oil and gas prices. And you can see on this chart that the average cost for gasoline is now over $4.50 a gallon at the end of this time period. Some places in the US, I was just in California last week, it was like $7 a gallon. So as we all know, oil and gas prices are surging. And as a result, the overall inflation rate is moving up. So the Federal Reserve has this target rate of about 2%. We're going the wrong direction. The consumer price index that just came out a couple of days ago is now at 3.8%. So inflation is going the wrong direction. And so usually when inflation starts to go up, the Federal Reserve would consider raising rates to help slow down growth, although this is sort of what's called an exogenous event. I mean, it's not caused from internal growth, it's caused from what's going on with the oil and gas prices. So, so all of that, you know, when they do surveys of consumers across the US, you can see here that trend is going downward. It's now below 100, meaning these higher prices are affecting the attitude of consumers. It means they'll spend money more slowly as a result. So the overall consumer environment isn't great right now. And as a result, the overall output of economic activity in the U.S. as measured by what's called gross domestic product it's at a moderate pace. The last quarter is 2%. But you can see that in the second, third quarter of last year, it was almost over 4% in one quarter. It has been slowing. Tariffs were introduced last year that slowed economic growth have since been reversed, as you're probably aware. But inflation, this higher inflation is going to affect the economy moving ahead, and that has implication on the investment environment. So, as I mentioned, the Federal Reserve, there's a lot of things. One of the things that they talk about and they make decisions on is where the level of what's called the federal funds rate is set every quarter. So it's currently set at a range of 3.5% to 3.75%. And at their last meeting, they did not make any changes to that rate. So the graph on the right is called a dot plot. They do this anonymous survey of 19 Federal Reserve board members and ask them where rates should be at different time frames. This last dot plot, which was produced in late December, shows that most of them expected rates to be reduced over the next few years. Now, this was before the big spike in inflation. So at the last meeting, there was some dissension. It was an 8-4 vote not to change rates at all. However, one dissenter thought rates should be lower. The other three dissented, and they wanted to take away the language that the tilt of the Federal Reserve was to reduce rates in the future. They were very concerned about this inflationary surge we've been dealing with right now. And it doesn't, even if the Strait opened today, it would take months before oil and gas prices would fall again. So we're going to be stuck with higher inflation for some time. And so that is affecting the interest rates. So interest rates have moved up across the board for longer term rates. Which is good in some sense because we can now invest some of the district's funds at yields of over 4%. So the sterling rate, so I'm going to talk about the implications of all this for the two portfolios. As you know, the district cash funded the Sterling Ranch Library project. They set aside almost $22 million for that. I worked with the staff to come up with an investment plan that was aligned with the project spending that was expected. It takes a number of years to build a new library project. As you're aware, we invested all that money in June of 25, about $21.5 million of securities. We locked in yields almost at 4% back then, which was very good. And so since inception, we've earned over $732,000 of interest earnings. That can be plowed right back into the project fund. That's the benefit of that. So if you get cost overruns and so forth, that extra interest earnings can be used for that, which isn't, when you start off this project, there's not really a firm expectation of these earnings, but now that we've got this plan in place, we can give you more defined numbers. You can't read this at all up here, but in your packet, you probably can read it a little better. This is a snapshot. It's in the monthly statements that the staff receives also. that gives you sort of, it lays out how the, all kinds of metrics on the investments. But these are all invested in very safe US Treasury securities. The cash that, when we have a maturity, the cash goes into a local government investment pool that is AAA rated. But what has changed though, since we initially started that, is that we had an initial forecast of spending for that project. That dark line on there is the pace of spending that was expected every month. It's about a 2-year project to start since inception. As you can see, the blue line is much lower than that dark line, meaning you've been spending money at a slower pace than expected. And Casey can probably address the number of reasons, and this is not uncommon, to be honest, in this current interest rate environment. But what that means is the cash available at the end of the month is now growing, meaning we have maturities occurring that were expected to be spent on the project. And normally I would be meeting with staff to talk about, getting a new plan to potentially reinvest that money. However, Casey delivered to me a couple months ago a new investment plan in blue. So you could see that there's an expectation that that will be accelerating right up in here. We're going to accelerate spending is expected here starting this summer. So we should start eating up some of that extra cash that's sitting there now. So there's no required change in the strategy for now because there's expected acceleration, as I just mentioned. So we'll be catching up here, and the completion date is still expected to be July of 27, based on the current plan. So before I go on to the other portfolio, any questions about that? Okay. As you also know, under the district's budget policy, there is a set-aside reserve of about $9.4 million. It's sort of like a core reserve of the library system. That was, once we identified that dollar amount, and that dollar amount will grow over time as your budget grows, by the way. We discussed with staff what the appropriate investment strategy would be, because it's different. You don't have a specific need for that funds like there is for the Sterling Ranch Library project. So it's invested differently with a longer term horizon to the investments. We started out with a range of 1 to 3 years for most of the securities. The initial yields were about just under 3.6%. Again, you can't read into the numbers, but what this area here shows, so we have securities actually laddered out all the way to 5 years. So we've locked in much of those yields, and as we get maturities, the good news is about this higher rate environment, as we get, looks like about 15% of the portfolio will be maturing in the next year. That will be invested at these higher yields. So again, this just adds to the growth of this portfolio and the earnings of this portfolio over time. Again, you can't read this page, but what this does, we run just to let you know, for all your portfolios, but for this one, we run a compliance report, meaning you have an investment policy that we comply with. There's rules in the investment policy. So for example, there's rules on maturity, on diversification, on credit rating. We run that through a software system to ensure that we're always complying with that, and then we produce this report. Again, this is in the monthly statements that staff receives. And so we are compliant with everything in your policy and with the strategy that we laid out from the start. So things are going well for that portfolio despite the volatile interest rate environment. And so really, this portfolio is only a few months old. Eventually, once we have a full quarter under our belt, we'll start producing investment performance statistics for you at a much higher font level, though, that you can actually read. So anyway, so that's sort of the summary on the 2 portfolios. Again, here to answer any questions, but the economic environment is a little bit volatile, but we're watching it all very, very closely.
Trustees, questions?
I do, but it's partially related. And what I mean by that was the Sterling Ranch came before I was on the board. So I noticed that it was stated that it was funded with cash on hand.
Yes.
Right?
That's correct.
Is that usual, that library districts are, I don't know, because
No.
I've seen other counties where they've had to take it to the voters to.
Yeah, yes, it is unusual. Most governments, to be honest, don't have the budgetary discipline to save up that much money. That's, and just think about for school, like Douglas County Schools. They did a bond issue last year for $300 million. There's no way. It would take 20 years for them to save $300 million. So they go to the voters and ask for a mill levy increase to fund that, and pay for that over 20 years in time. I think the district has gone to voters before, or COP, you can issue debt under what's called a certificate of participation without going to the voters. Which you did in 2015, I think, about that time frame, that those bonds will mature within the next 5 years, actually. You can do that, however, you make all those payments out of your operating fund. When you go to the voters themselves approve a mill levy, so it doesn't affect your operating fund, it's tacked onto their tax bill. So Amy, to your ultimate question is that it's not common because of the amounts involved for doing projects. But obviously before we got aboard here, there must have been board discussions years ago to start, saving these monies up to cash fund the project.
And I'm seeing different variances of different library districts. It seems like Arapahoe's doing okay, but others like Denver and Boulder and Buda are having to make some choices.
Yeah.
Are we set up comfortably? Let's say if we were to enter a recession and things like that, the fund, will it hold or?
So your district is funded mostly from property tax revenue, right? So property tax revenues are reassessed every 2 years. The only thing that could really materially negatively affect you is if we got to a severe recession affecting property values in the region, and because that would affect your operating fund revenues. You don't have sales tax, for example. So school districts and counties in particular, and school districts, counties, and special districts that rely on property taxes are much more insulated from economic changes than like a city, that's relying on sales tax, which can be much more volatile. So right now, based on I'm trying to think here, the reassessment years are on odd or even years, right?
It's next year, I believe, the
Yeah.
houses we do
Yeah,
this.
so the good news is, the way the county assessor does the assessments, they set out what's called notice of evaluation to us, we all get them. You usually know in advance before it goes into effect, because they send it out, usually you get a preliminary viewpoint, the staff can, like in August, before they go into effect. So you would sort of know and could make budgetary changes before that occurs, but generally, I know the Aurora Public Library system had much more difficult times in prior years. But I used to be on the foundation board, for 15 years, for what used to be the Adams County Library District. It's called Anything Libraries. And they had a very disciplined budgetary process. They actually went to the voters and approved like $40 million of debt financing. They built like 6 libraries. And it was all very successful. So whether you issue debt or don't issue debt for libraries, they both can be done successfully if you have a disciplined budgetary process. That's my speech for today.
Thank you.
I'd take this opportunity to say it's a particular point of pride, in my opinion, that we were able to set aside monies to our future capital needs, and therefore only pay for what the cost of the library is versus nearly doubling it if you issue debt over 30 years.
Absolutely.
Anything else for Chris? All right, thank you very much, Chris. See you next quarter. All right, do any board members have a conflict of interest with anything on the agenda today? Hearing none, we'll move on. Action and discussion items. Unbudgeted capital expenditure for a fire alarm panel. It's page 10 in your packet. Bob? Joe Corrinti, Director of Infrastructure Services, is gonna give you the context for this
Alright,
request.
Joe.
Well, the fire alarm panel is end of life, and
Could you stand up?
we, planned for the work and budgeted for the work in 2025, got the design piece done. There was turnover with Johnson Controls, the vendor, so we didn't get the work scheduled in 25. And then in 26, there were new code and permitting requirements with South Metro Fire District. So we had to redesign the work, which put it over the unbudgeted threshold
So,
where we needed to put more.
okay, so those were new, probably state requirements, right, regarding the fires?
And then it tied into the elevator modernization,
Oh,
became a much larger project.
Any other questions, trustees? I'll entertain a motion at the bottom of page 10, if you're so inclined.
I will recommend that the board approve the $52,302 capital expense for completion of the Highlands Ranch Library Fire Alarm Panel Replacement Project.
Do we have a second?
I second that.
Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Don't hear any. Later this evening, we'll have an executive session regarding the executive director's mid-year review. And now we'll move on to Rob's report for us.
I thought I'd give an update about libraries in Northwest Douglas County. I'll give a little bit of context. We have a facilities plan that you all have adopted and then validated over time. I don't know if you read any other government documents. Civil aid and reading doesn't usually match the descriptors for those kind of documents, or if you're struggling with sleeping at night, it may be helpful to you. They have some pieces that are technical, but I think have kept us in good stead at Douglas County Libraries. We talk about 10 years ago, how many of our libraries were not owned assets, how many were small rentals and strip malls. You've all directed us to own our assets and to move from rental to ownership. You've also told us to make sure that what we're building is a premium, consistent experience so that we don't give one part of the county a particular product and give another part of the county a lesser product. That we maintain what we build, that we won't build a new building if we can't maintain our libraries. You just allocated monies to tighten all the building envelopes. Our annual outlays for maintenance are frankly not common. Most of the time in libraries, we'll build a building, wait over a decade or 2 decades. We start to develop a problem, we go to the voters and ask us for more funds. We've put money into all of our existing buildings annually to alleviate that. Highlands Ranch nearly every year, millions of dollars, to make sure that our oldest building in the fleet feels like one of our youngest buildings in the fleet. We also do something just by practicality. There are other models in the library world where we might put a library in every neighborhood. We can't make the mill levy that we have stretch to every neighborhood in Castle Rock or Parker or Lone Tree. So we have a regional model where we say that we serve a 5-mile concentric circle. I'll show you that in a second. And because of that, we also expect a certain amount of density. We have many valued customers in communities like Larkspur where it's not quite big enough for us to actually site a library there. So the facilities plan says that we won't have a facility less than 16,000 square feet. We do that partially because to do all of our services, we need that much space, but also so that we don't get into the issue that many libraries have with very small libraries. They're postage stamped and they're extremely expensive to run, but they don't provide much in terms of community amenities. So if we went back a little over a decade, these were the commitments that we had across Douglas County. And those commitments are still the same, but in 2016, we met the master plan's check boxes with all that we were looking to do. with libraries in Castle Pines, which switched from a 2,500 square foot library, which, by the way, I'm just imagining it's something that's the size of my home. So you can tell that in terms of a civic building, it's pretty tiny. Now we're in a library there that's about 17,000 square feet. In Lone Tree, we went from a 10,000 square foot library in Yosemite to the building that you're in today, which is around 25,000 square feet. In Parker, we were serving nobly in a very old bowling alley. That's not metaphor. At about 18,000 square feet. Today, their library is 42,000 square feet. We then upgraded tremendously our Highlands Ranch library to match the master plan schedule. In 2023, we went to Castle Rock, and then we are looking to just provide the best service we can in Northwest Douglas County. That's the savings program now, to do right by our citizens that we care about across our entire service boundary. Where are we with that project today? We are in the last hurdle with permits and approvals. We have some stamps on documents yet to do, nothing to be concerned about. I'm not supposed to tell you that in about a month we'll break ground, because those could get delayed, but certainly this summer we will. All of our primary subcontractors are now under contract, so we don't have a labor issue. Steel has been let, not the entire package, but most of it. If we have concerns, it's just the general inflationary curve. We have contingencies that are in place for that. It will take about 12 months for us to deliver this library, and it will be at the same standard level as you'll feel like that you're in a Douglas County library. That's my report. You'll also notice in the report are our quarterly financials. If there are any questions, Casey's here, and our key performance indicators if you have any questions about those.
What's the square footage of the Sterling Ranch?
It's approximately 18,000. It's a little above that, but I don't remember it down to the foot.
Other questions of Bob or his report from the trustees?
You know me.
Go for it, Amy.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I remember a few years back when looking at where to put the library in the Northwest. I remember it says went through a process, we analyzed several different things you did, pros and cons, you actually looked at all the sites. Could you just briefly mention the process of, looking at different communities, all that?
So typically we look for a donation of land because it would add about 10% to the project if we hired a realtor and decided the library. The master plan talks about two tension points that we always have with donated land. We want a site that's good for business. We don't want to put a library in an inappropriate place where we struggle for the next 30 years to actually conduct business. At the same time, we try to put it in sort of the best hub of where the population is, understanding that if I went to Castle Rock today and we could make anything happen that was in our imagination, the Meadows would instantly move the library to the Meadows. We could keep going, right? Everybody would choose to have us. In Sterling Ranch, we were offered 2 plots of ground that were donations, one in Roxborough, one in Sterling Ranch. We did an evaluation by county engineering and the piece of land in Roxborough was encumbered by wetlands regulations that just didn't, that were the con argument to looking at that. We actually went back and forth with the developer in Sterling Ranch several times and even talked to Shea Homes across the highway for a donation. We don't always do that. In Castle Rock years and years ago, the library actually purchased a plot, but that's unusual. Every other site was a donated site. The board chose the Sterling Ranch site just based on visibility to the highway, the size of the plot of ground, the constructability, the ability to grow for the future. But certainly, we were just looking for the best place to serve that region and its citizens.
So wanna say thank you. Because, in looking at what other library districts are doing financially, and how we are being structured and set up, I'm liking what I'm seeing. Jeffco, for example, just last week announced it will be discontinuing its participation in the interlibrary loan request program due to financial costs. So Jeffco's having to even make that cut to its program, right? Boulder, due to reduced revenues, the Boulder Library District is delaying renovations and needing to cut back on preventative maintenance. This is just now, right? And in November, Boulder Library reduced security contracts by 44% and eliminated 11.5% of its staff positions due to budgets. So Casey, I don't know what you and your team are doing, but there's a magic sauce there because homes are expensive throughout Boulder, Jeffco, etc. So whatever your team, Bob, and you are doing, I'm very thankful, and I'm sure the staff is as well, right? Another one, Poudre Library in 2025 had to discontinue its digital access card and make cuts to its digital subscriptions. So the fact that Jeffco's in a place to build a library without having to take out bonds or COPs, in my opinion, is beyond impressive. So I'm just pointing that out, okay? But I do have some questions. Sure. So on page 25, under non-operating expenditures. So I understand operating, but what is non-operating? Let's start there.
So typically that's related to capital improvements.
Okay.
So that answers the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So for the different libraries, for example, and we get down to the highest expenditure for improved projects. I see Roxboro's listed at 11.495 million, when all the other projects are 550,000 or less.
Yeah, so that is
I'm kind of
internally how we
confused.
refer to Sterling Ranch.
Okay.
Because we're doing a one-for-one replacement. And so this was an accounting decision we made to make the accounting behind it way less complicated. So once, Roxboro kind of turns into Sterling Ranch, we'll rename that. So, but you're right, that is confusing, but that's the Sterling Ranch building.
Okay, cause I was like, I'm really confused about this one.
Yeah, that would be a very expensive ranch.
That's what I thought. I'm like, I don't, okay, what's going on there? All right, that makes way more sense now. Okay. Cause I was wondering, it was the only one with like multi-million, I'm like, and we lease the space too, so I'm really confused. Yeah, I said I don't want it. I do have a question, another one, and I don't know if this is the space to ask it. And maybe you could help me out, Terry. Yeah, maybe. So we lease the Roxborough Library, right?
It currently has a lease until December 2027.
And then we'll discuss it later in the summer, right?
Yeah, so the decisions you've made was to allocate monies, select a site for a new library. You approved the lease in Roxborough until December 2027. And at that point, you have to make other decisions. It's not a staff decision.
It's
The
a board
future.
decision,
It's
right?
a board decision.
Okay.
But those are decisions you've already made.
We've already, okay.
Yeah.
So
Site
I think-
selection, budget, constructability,
Right.
lease term.
And so the lease terms out December 31st, 2027. In theory, it could be renewed?
My guess is, it's only a guess, is that they would rent to us for perpetuity. Doesn't seem like the lease market in Roxborough is heady,
Okay.
but I don't know what their plans are, but you could lease it for as long as it would work for the organization and the people owning the building.
And what are the
A
total?
similar space next door has been empty for years.
Really?
22 years,
22 years?
yeah. It's a mirror of what we ran.
Wow. So, do we know how much it costs for us to lease that with the employee expenses and all that?
She can give you the actuals, I can give you the per years.
Yeah, with employee expenses, et cetera, that would be a little bit of an analysis, so that I can't just produce right now
Right.
off the top of my head. But I can certainly do that analysis.
Am I the only one that's curious?
What's the monthly rent?
Probably, right?
Yeah, I can't.
It's like $110,000 a year for the lease, but
That's
that's,
Okay, so if we're looking, so that's 110,000.
but I'd ask the board if you want a complete cost breakdown, we can do that.
Now, I'm just wondering, a rough ball estimate, what does it cost to fully operate the Roxborough Library? And what's the cost benefit analysis of considering closing it or keeping it open? And just having an understanding that, now some of these decisions were made, I think the very first library board meeting was when, Sterling Ranch MOU came up, right? That was February, and the Roxborough lease renewal was in August of last year, when I was in Norway. So, I missed two very important meetings, I guess. But, so yeah, just to understand the Roxborough situation a little firmer, no rush, I think I'm the only one curious, am I the only one curious? Apparently I'm the only one curious, okay,
I think we had a lot of those discussions back in the day.
okay,
We looked at all the costs, all the factors. So the board back then did go through that entire process and analyzed and determined, my perception was one location for that region made sense.
yeah,
And looked at the land, as Bob said, in two different places, the whole thing, finally determined the best interest for the whole region would be to do what we're doing, it was cost effective as well.
and so the Roxborough Library is under a 5-mile radius to Sterling Ranch, right? I tried to do a spitball distance, it was under 5 miles to the Sterling Ranch location.
Those bubbles are 5-mile concentric circles.
Yeah, so,
Just to show you what the service pattern is for a given building.
yes, if you look up where the current Roxborough Library is to the Sterling Ranch Community Center, I just guessed it, right? It was, I think, like 4.6 miles, so it's under 5 miles.
I thought it was more about 3. but
Okay. Yeah, no, so that's good, you guys already got it, you got it, right? Okay, cool.
Is that it?
Not really.
No?
I have one more question. Sorry, they love me, sorry, not really. I don't know where to ask this question, but it's with the director's report, right? Is that where we ask the director questions, if we have questions related to the director?
Well, let's give it a try and see what it's about.
Okay, cool. Sorry. So, in that book, You're the Color, and we I think all got the emails, right? Can you explain a little more about that? Because they were kind of confusing to me while I was reading them.
I guess I don't understand the question. What is it that you're wanting me to address?
There seemed to be some confusion, well, and I am confused. When I was reading the emails about wanting it appeared, I forget their names, but it appeared that they wanted a firmer understanding on the book collection policy. Did it seem like that, or am I misreading those emails?
There were several questions,
Yeah.
so I don't have them in front of me right now. I mean, I'd start with this. Colorado law says that once you inspect a book that's been challenged, you can't do it again for 2 years. So if the board does, there'll be counter to Colorado law. Secondly, your own
But we haven't
policy.
made a final decision on that, right?
um, I don't know how you
'Cause
talk
if
about
we-
anything other than a decision was made. You have a policy and a process and we ran through it,
But if they wanted to, could it come to the board?
not according to your policy.
So how does a book challenge get to the board?
The staff reviews it and goes through the process that we've laid out in our policy, and they provide that report to the board.
And then,
The
If-
board can change policy, although they can only do so within law.
and if citizens wanted that, they could, or am I misreading this?
If citizens wanted to do
To ask the board to question things, could the board?
Policy.
Right,
Policy.
so if a citizen has a question about subject X,
the way that the policy lists the process now is if a book is challenged or reviewed, whatever the verb you choose to use, staff goes through a checklist on policy and on law, makes a determination if they can meet the request of the person making it or not. Typically, requests are to remove an item, to move an item, to label an item. Those are sort of the stock things that people ask for. Staff will respond whether they're going to do any of those things or cannot do those things according to the policies and the laws. And then that determination's made. The appeal that can be made to the board is to change your policy, or that you work handled in a way that meets the library's criteria for working with customers.
so as I see it, in April, there was a book for young adults. Without question, it got moved to the adult section, right? And then this book, which is for 4-year-olds, the persons that are having questions about it are not asking for the book to be removed. They're asking it for it to be moved.
There have been both requests.
Okay, but if they wanted to just have it moved to the young adults,
So in your policy, you stipulate to me the criteria to use and whether or not a book can be moved or it cannot be moved. It says to place the book in its standard position in keeping with the industry. So in keeping with this book, there are 2 pieces of information that speak to the standard in the industry. First, if we look up the book, the Library of Congress rates the book according to its age and life stage. They say this is an easy reader picture book.
but the Library of Congress, is this already in the Library of Congress? Cause it's a self-published book, right?
Library of Congress creates a database record for libraries all over the United States with data elements in it.
So the
One of
lib-
them is location.
So the Library of Congress has confirmed that this book, which is self-published, you are the color, that this book, which has questionable overtones of hate, is appropriate for 4-year-olds?
You just said a lot of things. What they say is that the location standard in the library for it is an easy reader picture book. Secondly, there is a group called BISAC, the Book Industry Standards Group. They also call this a juvenile picture book.
So they don't look at the content at all?
Well, I presume that when they rate the book for its life stage, that they're looking at its content. What you tell me to do as director is to use the standard sources and place them where they're customarily placed, not arbitrarily.
So how did the book, without question or debate, in April, get moved from young adult to adult?
So that's a different matter. That book had multiple informants on where it could be placed. So there was some latitude that I could do to move the book. There wasn't, with this book, any source that was standard that you had me consult that would move a picture book to the adult collection.
So Amy, the things that we could do are change a policy or investigate whether or not a policy was followed, or whether or not we followed our normal procedures for dealing with
Right.
it. That should be the limit of the discussion here at the board. So if you have a motion on one of those, I would entertain
I would like to have a motion to discuss at the June meeting a review of our policies as they pertain to picture books within our Douglas County library systems that may or may not.
And would you have a recommended change to the policy for our June meeting?
Well, I appreciate the position that I'm being put in, Terry, but I wanted to have a very firmer understanding of why a book in April. By the way, I looked at that book in April and it had some very inappropriate sex orgies with cadavers. And the publisher, Penguin, actually decided itself that this book was to be an adult book. So the publisher itself had originally decided that this book was young adult, and then probably the pressure made the decision to change it to adult, and my assumption is maybe that is what moved the book from young adult to adult. As I'm understanding this book, because it's a picture book.
Excuse me, Terry, you have a motion on the table. We need a second.
Did you wanna make a motion?
Well, I'm just very confused by a lot of things. I didn't actually want to make a motion, but I also didn't want to be shut down. I think I need a clearer understanding of how a book in April got moved without a blink in the eye, by the way. And then a book, to me, which is not even being asked to be removed from the library. So it still falls within the First Amendment rights. It's about age-appropriate content. And I will say it for the umpteenth time, and I'm trying to understand this. I am understanding that this is a picture book. And because it's a picture book, the BISAC and the law and the Library of Congress state it must stay in early education. That's what I'm understanding. What I'm not understanding is the verbiage in the book, which calls for an extermination of an entire ethnic group, and which is hurting fellow residents here in Douglas County. I don't care if a person is Muslim, Jewish, Christian, white, black, Hispanic. I am very uncomfortable teaching hate to 4-year-olds.
Amy?
Yeah.
I wanna pause and I wanna check and see if the board wants to continue this discussion.
Okay.
So, all in favor of continuing this discussion? Well, first off, is there any discussion from the rest of the trustees? All in favor of continuing this discussion, say aye. Opposed? Nay?
Damn. That's some shit.
All right, anything else on the Executive Library Director's report? Nope. On to partner reports, Amy, Douglas County Youth Initiative.
The Outstanding Youth Awards event, I'm getting these notes from Patty, was terrific. The only feedback for next year was to have more tissues. Youth Congress, it appears, hopefully will be held at the Capitol. If not, it'll be held at DCSD Legacy Campus. Brainstorming of 8 topics to be discussed. Highlands Ranch and DCSD talked about issues with e-bikes. DCSD reported the district-wide cell phone policy was adopted by the board on April 21st. And DCL update presented by Jamie included summer reading, as well as our partnership with DCSD to support the Lend a Hand School Supply Drive and the free summer lunch program.
Thank you, Amy. Partnership with Douglas County Governments, Ted.
Yes, we had a meeting a week or so back. George Brockler, the district attorney, presented very interesting, but this is the most interesting part. During my report that I provide there, I try to make this thing interesting because we're all in different partnerships. And I took 3 different things that you can check out: a ukulele, a bongo, a drum set, and a radon detector. It's kind of fun, but I sensed that people might like to see what all the different items were. And so Amber and her team came up with a really cool little handout, quick of all the things, and we put it out on all the tables. And, interestingly, people were more interested in this than they were in the three things. So
There you go.
There you go. But what was astounding, I've been doing this reporting for 3 years, and this was the only time I've had that many people come up afterward. The mayor of Parker came up, wanted all the spare copies, and he's giving them, he owns 2 coffee shops, and he's putting them in there for his customers. An official in Lone Tree wanted the PDF, because she's gonna send it out to people, and she's also gonna try to figure out how have their website have more about all this. Another person came up and had looked at all the pictures, and was asking, what's that a picture of? And I didn't know, I think it's a knitting machine. But my point was, people are really interested in all these items. So in addition to all the gazillion books we have and everything else, this resonated. I've never had that many people talk about this stuff, so that was kind of fun.
Good report, thanks. Douglas County Libraries Foundation, Taylor?
I do, the gala is coming up, but this is so beautifully written in front of me, and I've been practicing my story reading voice with Dane, so I have to read what's here. Join the Douglas County Libraries Foundation for an evening of exquisite dining, immersive entertainment, and moments of enchantment inspired by the timeless tale of beauty, envy, and power. Your evening in the velvet dark woods features a custom crafted cocktail, sumptuous meal, striking entertainment, and a tempting silent auction, where hidden treasures await those bold enough to claim them. So that was wonderfully written.
Well.
Friday, September 25th, 6 p.m. at the Highlands Ranch Mansion. The tickets are $175, I'm assuming that's per person, and all trustees are invited to attend. Former employee Rick Odell joined the foundation board to continue his support of DCL. He recently took on a new commitment as facilities director for Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and with his new role resigned his foundation position.
Thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, the next item on our agenda is executive session.